Hi, and welcome back to my shop. I'm still working on my walnut slab for my hall table project. I've got all of the bark removed and I've got the sides sanded out. So my next step is to plane the faces of the board. So first I'm going to flatten the top, and then I'm going to work on the bottom and get it thicknessed so that I have a nice consistent slab all the way across. One of the challenges that I did notice is that there's a good amount of twist to this board. So there's going to be a good amount of elbow grease involved in this because I do have to use hand tools once again for this step of the project. This board's just too wide for me to get across my jointer or even through my planer. So I'm going to show you how I do that. You can see here that I have some shims placed underneath the corner of the board here. If I pull this out, you can see that because of the twist in this board, it'd be a very uneven surface for me to plane on. So I've just gone and shimmed up all the corners that need it. You can see I have a smaller shim at the other end, and that gives me a nice stable surface to work with. Now, I mentioned that this board has a good amount of twist, and you might ask, well, how do you know that? Well, first of all, when I laid it down on the bench, I have this one end that is clearly off the ground, but I've also put down winding sticks on the top of my board. So these are basically just pieces of cherry that I've jointed so that they're nice and straight, and I have one on each end of the board. And then all I do is sight down the line, and I can see pretty clearly here that the two are not coplanar. So clearly the far right end there, all the way down there, is much higher than this end here, and by the same token, this end here is much higher than the left side at the far end. So that means I have a pretty decent amount of twist that I'm going to have to work out of this board. And that also presents an additional challenge that I'll show you next. I'm now at the other far end of the board, and this is where I kind of run into problems. First of all, you can see that I have no real straight surface here. So when I want to clamp this down on my bench, the best I could do is put a bench dog here, but it's at this weird angle and it'll just squeeze the board out that way. So I really can't clamp this down onto my bench to get it nice and secure to plane it. But the second problem I have, and the bigger problem here, is that once I removed all the bark from this, kind of Y where this crotch comes out, you can see that I don't have a whole lot of material left here. And if you'll recall, when sighting down the winding sticks, this is the high side of the top, which means I'm going to have to remove quite a bit of material from this side. And because this is so thin to begin with, I probably only have maybe 3/4 of an inch to begin with. It's actually just about an inch, but if I remove any more than, say, 1/4 of an inch, which I'm sure I'm going to have to do, I'm going to be left with a really thin side here. And the more material I take off the top, of course, I'm going to have less material in width because of this curve here. So unfortunately, I think my answer is I need to cut a straight line on this end of my board. Now I want to preserve that crotch, but I do need a straight surface to reference so that I can effectively plane this. But more importantly, I also need enough material left at this end so that when I plane it down, I still have a nice thick top. Because this board really doesn't have any straight lines at all, I'm sort of free to draw my end line almost anywhere I want and at any angle. I do want to preserve as much of this, especially the heartwood here and the crotch, because that's where the grain will hopefully be really, really interesting, because you'll see the grain start to split out this way, and that's when you get some good swirl. I do, however, want to leave at least some sort of perpendicular surface where I can clamp this down on my bench in order to plane it, but I'm just going to use my my winding stick here to figure out where I want my line to be, and then I'm going to cut this off with my track saw. Now you can see here, even after I made my cut, how thin the material is right here. So clearly I am going to have to back that cut off. It does get thicker pretty quickly right here, but I'll probably have to take at least another 1.5 inches off. But I'll do that after I finish planing. At least for now I have a nice flat surface that I can at least clamp this to. But I'll be able to look at the grain and really come up with a a more educated decision as to where I want the end to be. Now it's just a matter of figuring out where my high spots are on the board, and then I can get to work with my hand planes. I'm gonna start out using my number 5 jack plane, and I'm planing across the grain. That removes the material a lot more quickly and will also help me get the high spots leveled off. Now if I had a 4 plane or a scrub plane, that would also be pretty effective here, but I don't have one, so the jack plane's the best option for me at this point. I've sighted down now, and I have my 2 ends pretty much coplanar now. So I'm starting to pay a little bit more attention to the middle parts of the board. So I then move my winding stick toward the middle, and I'm going to sight down again, and I can see that I still have a pretty significant high spot on the top here. So I'm just marking that with an X as to where I need to remove more material. Same situation here. I've already got that marked. The highest spot's actually right in here. So I'm going to work on that a little bit more, even this out a little bit. And then I'll just keep double checking. And I'm also checking to make sure that it's flat left to right. And I'm also starting to look a little bit now too about how jointed the top is front to back. So I'm at least paying attention to that when I'm removing a lot of this material so that I don't end up with, you know, like real big dips or something in the middle of the board. Again, I'll even that out when I switch to my number 7 jointer plane, but I at least want to be cognizant of it starting now. Now that I've gotten most of the twist out of my board, I'm now switching it around and I'm using my jointing plane. It's a number 7, and I'm running this with the grain, and I'm just basically trying to remove any hops that I have in here. And you can hear the longer of a pass where you actually hear it taking shavings, the flatter the board is getting. So I still have a little ways to go. I've got a high spot here, and inevitably that would happen after using the jack plane. Now, one thing that I did sort of learn through this process is that the twist, especially the amount of material I had to remove in this corner, was pretty significant. So for the backside, I'm actually going to take another old plane iron and I'm going to shape it into a scrub plane iron, which is a really sort of scalloped shape. So it really lets you hog out a lot of material at a time, because the other side's going to take just as much time as this side if I don't make some adjustment to my milling process. All right, I've finally gotten the top face of the slab flattened. I have a little bit of tear out where I got some funky grain direction, so I'm gonna have to deal with that. Hopefully I can hit it with my smoother, and that will remedy that situation. But I've also run into another challenge. Typically, you know, once you've flattened one side of the board, you take a thickness gauge and then you mark the thickness on a line on the side, so that when you start planing the other side, you know how far down to go so that the 2 sides are coplanar, so you have even thickness throughout the board. The challenge here is that because I have this undulating surface, especially on this other side here, there's really no way I can easily mark that thickness. The other challenge I ran into is just the sheer amount of work it was because of the amount of twist in this board. And I considered, you know, shaping a plane iron so that I could essentially, you know, make a scrub plane out of my number 5 jack plane. That would have sped the process up a little bit, but it's still just a lot of material removal. So it occurred to me that, you know, despite what the purists will want to see, the drum sander might actually be the best solution here. If I can actually get this thing mounted on a couple, you know, an in feed and out feed, I can do this much more quickly with the drum sander, and it is an open-ended sander, so I can get something 36 inches wide through that drum sander. So since I have that one side already jointed and flat, that gives me the right reference point that I could then feed this through the drum sander. So I think that's going to just be a much faster and easier process. And now that I've got my slab nice and flat and reasonably smooth, I can just touch it up with my smoothing plane. That's going to get rid of any last sanding marks I have on there and give me a finished smooth surface. Now that I have the top thickness, I can look at sort of the final shape and size that I want this top to be. Now you can see here that once I've kind of gotten this to the proper thickness, I really don't have a whole lot of material left at this edge where the crotch basically was. So what I'm going to do is take off about another 2.5 inches from the end, and that will give me, you know, some thicker material underneath here to make up the side. And I've also decided I want to square off the very top, otherwise I have this kind of crooked angle over here, and then I have this sort of sharp angle over here that's going to be pretty pointy. So I've just got my square laid down, and then just for kind of reference point, I also have my combo square laid down on the end here, and I'm just going to draw a line there, and that's going to mark kind of where the end needs to be, and then I'll use my track saw to actually make that final cut. And then what I'll do is I'll just make sure that the other side is completely parallel. Next, I'm using the track basically as a straight edge here. So I'm going to use my square again and just ensure that the track in this position is completely square to this end, and I've got it right where my pencil line was. And that will basically make sure that I'm cutting a completely square edge off right there. And while you can't really see it from the camera angle, I'm also going to be able to cut off this very tip of the kind of sharp edge on this end. I'm just going to make a pencil mark there for reference point. So essentially I'm going to have kind of, you know, a square set of corners inside the live edge of the table. So that'll give it a nice kind of pleasing look. And then I'm essentially just repeating the same process for this other corner. I just made a mark here so I know that my final width here is going to be 17 inches. And then that'll let me cut off this sort of like real thin piece here, and I'll have a little more of a substantial corner. And then what I'll eventually do here, because I really don't want that sharp line right there, I'll ease that edge with my spoke shave and a little bit of sandpaper, kind of get that to blend in a little bit better. And then I'll have to just take the real sharp edge off here. One other thing that I'll probably want to think about is the end here. I really don't want to have a square on the bottom there, given how we have this nice kind of gradual undercut here. So I'll probably do some sort of bevel, most likely just using hand planes, just to make the end of the board look a little bit lighter as well. It's still over an inch. It's about 1.25 inches thick, all said and done. Despite the fact that I still need to put a few final touches on my top, I do at least now know kind of the final size and shape. So at this stage, I can actually flip the board over and I'll know exactly the size that I need my carcass and my aprons and legs to be to fit the bottom. So that's really why I had to do all of the major work on the tabletop first, because I really didn't know what the final size and shape was going to be.